Excellent. Well, thank you, Nish. It's great that you're pulling this together, and it's a super group. Look, I think that it's clearly it's a fascinating situation when it comes to the standards landscape. Everyone is talking about the need for uniform standards, for clarity, in order to be able to plan projects and execute projects, knowing what the rules are. At the same time, just about all governments are instituting rules that suits them, and in a way deviating from that. At this big Rotterdam conference 6 weeks ago, where we had many of you, and there was a strong Indian presence, Secretary Bala was very clear that as India tries to finalize its own standards, and with that I mean what in practice, what are the details behind the commitment to 2 kilos 12-month average actually mean? How do you measure that? What are the specific rules? When he commented on that, he was clear in Rotterdam that the Indian government would ensure that its standards, that its products also meet European standards. I think here Bala was specifically referring to the so-called RFNBO rules, which we know that many of you have been following and that many of you have been devising your projects to satisfy. Now, when it comes to RFNBO and the European rules, a couple of very quick points, and Sam will elaborate on this later. The first one is, of course, that there are no voluntary certificate schemes yet established, approved by the EU. And what that means is that so if you like, the big global standards, you got obviously the green hydrogen standard that we have developed with a number of developers, also from India. But there are also many parallel schemes. None of us have yet received that pre-approval by the EU, which means that we're completely ready to go within the EU system. Another important thing, of course, that I'm sure many of you are aware of is the fact that RFNBO, of course, also covers transport. And that, of course, means that it is very hard to design a project without also knowing what the emissions associated with the transport to Europe will be. So in a way, you need to have the whole package clear in order to calculate what the actual RFNBO content will be like, if you understand what I mean. Sorry, that was a bit unclear. But anyway, given that transport is included, it is not just a matter of looking at the project in, for example, India on its own, but one also needs to factor in the whole process before one has an understanding of whether a project will be RFNBO aligned or not. So it is in that flow. And then, of course, when it comes to some other jurisdictions, Japan and Korea, the main thing has actually, as I'm sure you're aware of, not so much been developments on the standard side, but rather on the auction criteria. And we, for one, as a group organization, have had a lot of contact with the governments in both countries, so both METI and MOTI, in terms of feeding in. And we're very grateful for some input, very strong input from some of you guys that are attending this meeting today, in terms of the requirements that products need to satisfy in order for being eligible within the contracts for different schemes in those countries. So, and then of course, when it comes to the US, there are still a lot of unknowns in terms of the tax credits, as I'm sure many of you are aware of. What this all means, if we take half a step back, is the fact that on the receiving side, there are lots of unknowns. And then, of course, also we're all aware of that on the Indian side, we don't quite know some of the detail. So the key question, and what Sam will talk more about, is how we've tried to design the hydrogen standard, the green hydrogen standard, to ensure that it provides an instrument and that using pre-qualification is the furthest of all the various efforts. We want to make sure that no one has been able to be better, getting further at having an instrument that means that you can, with an early project, with greater certainty and specificity, the extent to which a product coming out of these projects meet these standards. In other words, if one takes an early project, a feasibility, for example, of an Indian project through pre-qualification with a standard, we want to demonstrate, we want our developers that we're working with to be confident, satisfied that they have done the utmost, the best that can possibly be done in order to ensure standards alignment, RFNBO or the Japanese auction, whatever it might be. And we have seen way too many assurance providers, so like the big ones, provide services here without being quite upfront about the lack of certainty that we must recognize is still a fact here. So those are some of the deliberations and backgrounds to where we are at the moment. Obviously, Sam will now provide greater detail, and we very much hope that this will be an open discussion rather than us making presentations. And, if you can keep your camera on and so on. Nish, I don't know if everyone's camera is enabled, but it'd be much easier to have that interactive session if people are available. Sam and Nish, is that a fair introduction?
Yeah. No, that was great, Jonas. I think you set the context very well there. And for everyone's information, you can switch on your cameras, just not your mics for now. But once we have the Q&A going, we'll let everyone come in with your own voice to ask your questions. But please, if you can put your cameras on, please do so. And thanks very much, Jonas. I think you've given a very good overview on the current landscape and what the situation is. But I think Sam, who's the director for the Green Hydrogen Standard within the Green Hydrogen Organization. Sam, if you could come in and say a few words and kick off.
Thanks, Nish, and thanks, Jonas, and hello, everyone. First of all, as a matter of protocol, I should congratulate India on winning the World Cup and the cricket. Well done. A tough thing for an Australian to deal with, but there you go. If you're on this call, it's because, and you can already see in terms of people that have joined us, a lot of familiar names. Every hydrogen conference has a session on standards and certification. And it's usually, a group of auditors and other technical experts. We're not going to repeat that today. I'm going to try to be as sort of concrete and practical as possible about some things that are happening at the global level. And then, as Jonas said, some recommendations or guidance from our side on how we're working with project developers, to actually to get these projects off the drawing board and actually make them happen. So I'm going to cover a lot of territory, and I'm going to be purposefully quite provocative in some of the things I have to suggest. And that will lead into a discussion where we welcome everyone to participate. So let me first see if I can share a presentation. Nish, if you could confirm that you can see this, that would be great. I'll put it on presentation mode.
Wonderful. Looks good, Sam.
Right. So you can see the front page?
Yes, we do.
Great. Well, many of you will be familiar with some of the work that's happening at the global level. And that work typically focuses on the emission intensity of the different hydrogen production pathways. There's been some great work done by the IEA. There's also some work by the IPHE on setting out methods for determining greenhouse gas emissions. And that IPHE standard, well, that IPHE work is now being translated into an ISO standard. This is really important and interesting work, but one of the key things that it's missing is it doesn't say anything about the thresholds. It says this is how we will measure emissions. It doesn't say anything about which hydrogen production pathways are aligned with our decarbonisation objectives. So that's a big weakness in this work. We're also seeing, as Jonas mentioned, different countries around the world developing hydrogen standards reflecting their comparative advantages. You can see that the country, or rather the region that's come the furthest, is clearly the European Union, with a clear definition of what they call renewable hydrogen, green hydrogen, and the RFMBO delegated acts. So yeah, they have 2 delegated acts that have been published with very clear rules for what is and what is not green hydrogen. You also have later this year another delegated act that will define low carbon hydrogen, which covers blue hydrogen. So that's something that's very much on our agenda. We'll be following that closely. And if you're interested in learning more about that work, then you should get in touch and we can brief you on that. As Jonas mentioned, there's some draft regulations in the United States. There's also a proposal in Canada. But in lots of other jurisdictions, there's a lot of talk about clean hydrogen and low carbon hydrogen, but no clear definition of what that means. And what I'm going to do is just highlight one concrete example of that that's come up today. The leading story, if you go to Hydrogen Insight today, is that the Brazilian Senate has just agreed some new subsidies for hydrogen production in Brazil, and that the threshold is 7 kilos, which is the highest threshold that's been announced around the world. Meanwhile, in Australia, you have Australian government has announced a hydrogen production tax credit, and there to qualify, the threshold is 0.6 of a kilo. So this in very simple terms highlights the fact that the hydrogen policy landscape is being fragmented, that there's different standards in different places. So on the face of it, it looks like 7 kilos is very high, and it looks like 0.6 is quite low. And actually the point I want to make is that these thresholds can actually be quite misleading, because the devil is in the detail, as I like to say. In this table, there's a lot of information here, but I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to go through it. We've been looking at a number of different projects in Queensland, in Northern Australia. And here, these are all hypothetical projects, but I'm contrasting 4 different projects with very, very different characteristics. On the left-hand side, you've got project number 1, which has its own dedicated renewables. It is connected to the grid, but only to export excess power. So it's not using any electricity from the grid. It's only using the renewable electricity that it produces. It therefore has quite a low electrolyzer utilization. It's only using the electrolyzer 55% of the time. and has quite a high production cost. If you move to project number 2, it's connected to the grid. And as I've highlighted here, the grid in Queensland is often quite dirty. There's a lot of coal power in the Queensland grid. So if this second project, they've agreed a power purchase agreement with a renewable electricity certification. That power is matched on an hourly basis. It comes from a new renewable electricity facility in the same power market. Now, they can only get that power for 75% of the time, and their production cost is $3 a kilo. Project number 3, again, grid connected. It's not hourly matched, it's only daily matched in terms of the PPA. The power comes from various facilities on the national market. They have electrolyzer capacity factor of 90% and a lower production cost. And then finally, we have a 4th project connected to the grid. Its PPA is only annually matched. It has its electrolyzer capacity at 100%, and it has the lowest production cost. I've put greenhouse gas emissions less than 0.6%. The question for the Australian government, which they're wrestling with right now as they design their production tax credit, is what kind of electricity should qualify as zero emissions? Are all of these projects eligible? Or do you need to have daily matched, hourly matched, or dedicated renewables? Right down the bottom, I've put green hydrogen question mark. So for all of these projects, it's not clear yet whether these projects will be considered green hydrogen. The first one will be. When it comes to the European Union, the first 2 projects would not be eligible. Sorry, rather, projects 3 and 4 would not be eligible. Projects 1 and 2 would be. All of these projects, now their production would probably be accepted in the Japanese market, but only 2 of them would be accepted in the European market. So here we have, these are not, and I should say again, these are not, these don't refer to specific projects, but if you're a green hydrogen project developer in Queensland, these are 4 options available to you. They have very different production costs, have different electrolyzer capacity, but the question is, to come back to this definition, what renewable electricity qualifies to be counted as zero emissions, and therefore which projects qualify for the subsidy? So just to go back, it looks on the face of it like Australia has a very strict threshold, but if it has loose requirements, actually quite a lot of projects could qualify for this subsidy. We don't yet know what the rules are going to be in Brazil. So it's not as simple as just comparing 7 kilos and 0.6 of a kilo. Nish, I might pause there actually. Does anyone have any questions about that? I wonder whether anyone recognizes that, and I'm being a bit cheeky here, it's a similar dynamic in India. We could easily be looking at 4 different projects in India, some of them with dedicated renewables, others with grid connection, some of them with hourly matched PPAs, others with annually matched PPAs. This table could easily be readjusted for the Indian context. So this is a question that not only the Australian government needs to wrestle with, but also the Indian government needs to wrestle with as it decides which projects will be eligible for support. And we can already see that some projects, or some green hydrogen will be accepted in some markets and other green hydrogen won't be. So we're starting to see what we call the sort of fragmentation of the green hydrogen market. We've got on the left-hand side what we would call high credibility projects. On the right-hand side, lower credibility projects. So this is a really important dynamic that's playing out in the green hydrogen industry. In Europe, there's a very clear definition about which projects qualify and which ones don't. But in most other jurisdictions, these rules aren't yet clear. Nish, I can't see whether anyone's got their hand up, so maybe you could, if anyone would like to comment on this, now would be a good opportunity.
Yeah, we have a hand up. Ali, I think you can unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah. So I'm Ali Khattab from PwC India. So from your analysis, it seems that the production cost reduces if the utilization of my electrolyzer increases. So major cost component is of electrolyzer. So the question of electricity being cheap is not the question. So what if my renewables has a storage element and I'm able to provide it has a big enough storage element so that I'm able to provide electricity for much longer period. And by doing that, I can improve the utilization factor and reduce the production cost. Will that solution be feasible?
The short answer is yes. We're seeing that in a number of projects around the world that they have their own dedicated renewables and some storage, battery storage, so that they can increase the electrolyzer capacity. The challenge is more that we're seeing in some projects whether they can use storage on the grid and whether renewable electricity that's stored can also be considered as renewable electricity. So you're right, there are definitely aspects of these projects we could make them more complicated. Maybe, and we can come back to this, but I want to, in the sort of second part of my presentation, what I want to focus on is, yes, go ahead.
We have one more hand up before you move on.
Please.
You can take that one. It's from Dr. G.S. Kapoor. Doctor, if you're available and if you could switch on your camera as well, that'll be great.
Sure. Yeah, I have a similar question to what has been asked earlier. If the production cost is inversely related to electrolyzer capacity factor, that means 100% will yield the lowest production cost. But that 100% availability will come with battery electric storage that itself will add to the cost of the project enormously. Am I right?
Well, there's a couple of things going on here. One is that if you want to purchase renewable electricity, that's hourly matched, that's more expensive than purchasing renewable electricity that's daily or annually matched. But yes, you're right. I mean, a big part of so we often say that there's three key variables in looking at the cost of green hydrogen. One is the cost of capital, the cost of lending money, raising equity. Two is the capital costs associated with purchasing and deploying the electrolyzers. But the biggest cost is the power cost. If you want hourly matched renewable electricity, that's more expensive than daily and annually matched. So that's what I'm trying to reflect here in these sort of hypothetical production costs. Certainly we see that in other jurisdictions. So an annually matched renewable electricity certificate in Australia is much cheaper than, an annually matched is much cheaper than an hourly matched. We can come back to this. We've got some time available for discussion. But what I want to do in the second part of my presentation before we open it up is come back to Jonas's point about, well, what are we doing about this? Given that there is uncertainty about what qualifies and what doesn't, how can we move forward? Last year, we launched the second version of our green hydrogen standard. We've made a number of refinements. We now cover a number of different derivatives. So in addition to setting a threshold for green hydrogen, we cover green ammonia, green methanol, and also synthetic methane. The key thing that we've done is, because most projects are not ready to be certified, we've included what we call a pre-qualification for early stage green hydrogen projects. We're also made some changes. We're looking at the utilization of biomass and bioenergy. So we've extended the standard in that regard. We've also looked at hydrogen emissions as an important issue. And we continue to build on the work on greenhouse gas emissions, but also to focus on other ESG performance criteria like water, land use, human rights, labor laws, etc. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and why that's important. We've been working with project developers around the world. We've been involved in a number of different projects. All of these are at an early stage, either at an advisory or pre-qualification stage of the project. And again, that's because, and Jonas sort of touched on this on his introduction. You know, in order to get your project built, you need to convince your customers and your bankers that your product will be accepted in the market as being green. But you can't get certified until you've built your project. So there's a real chicken and egg problem here. We need certification in order to build projects, but you need to build in order to be certified. So there's lots of projects that are stuck in this situation at the moment. So that's why we've extended the green hydrogen standard to cover this early stage pre-qualification work. The point is to de-risk these projects, is to identify what are the key characteristics of the project, which market is being targeted, what are the requirements. So for let's take a project that's in India that's looking to export to Europe. So what we need to do is look at what are the requirements in India. We also need to look at what are the requirements in Europe. And what we aim to do is use our work here to cover both the host country and the destination country so that we can pre-qualify a project so the project developer can take this work to their two prospective customers and to prospective investors and say that there's been an independent review demonstrating that the project is aligned with those requirements. So that's the work that we've been doing in the last 12 months. And there's enormous interest in using tools like this to help get projects to final investment decision. I want to quickly highlight a couple of things about what we're typically seeing, what we're getting right, and also want to highlight a couple of issues that are being neglected. We see, as I've mentioned already, we've seen a lot of focus on defining what is renewable electricity and looking at the direct and indirect impact of these projects on the grid, the so-called 3 pillars. This is a major focus in the EU, the US, and Canada, but it is being neglected elsewhere, except where project developers are looking to export to Europe. And so RFMBO designation is key. As I mentioned, we're starting to see the emergence of what we're calling low credibility green hydrogen, where there is limited attention to the impact of these projects on the grid. A second issue where we're seeing a lot of attention is on water. And that's not surprising given that most green hydrogen projects are taking place in water-stressed environments. So we're seeing a lot of work being done on how to extract water or use desalination equipment, wastewater management, water cooling versus air cooling, looking at the costs and benefits for local communities. The challenge is that while there's a lot of good work being done here, you know, these issues are actually ignored when it comes to hydrogen certification. So you can get a certification of your emissions, but no attention to some of these crucial water issues. And then finally, what are some of the issues that we need to prioritize? There's definitely a need to take a wider look at the environmental impact of these projects. There is, again, inconsistency between the global and national regulations. Sometimes the national regulations are simply not clear. We're seeing projects being delayed in lots of places around the world because local communities are not convinced that these projects will bring any benefits. So there's a lot of discussion about what are the appropriate fiscal and tax terms, about local content, and about the cumulative impact of these projects. So instead of looking at each project individually, trying to step back and look at the development of the industry and say, what is the collective or the cumulative impact of all of these projects going forward? And then finally, an issue that's very sort of close to our hearts at GH2 is, we can look at the environmental and social impact, but we also need to look at the governance of this industry. There is a lot of secrecy. That's to some extent to be expected because we're dealing with, a new industry where there's intellectual property and commercially sensitive terms. But we're already seeing the first examples of corruption cases. We've also seen a number of projects where there's been accusations of human rights abuses, people being forcibly removed from their land. So there's very much a need for the green hydrogen industry to embrace the lessons learned from other sectors about transparency and accountability. So our standard addresses those requirements as well. In closing, Nish, I've just suggested a couple of questions. As Jonas said right at the outset, the hydrogen standards landscape is fragmented. It would be wonderful if the global industry all agreed to one standard, but that's not likely to happen. As we've seen with the examples from Brazil, Australia, the US, we're seeing a proliferation of different systems around the world. The challenge is how do we accommodate that? How do we develop standards that can deal with that fragmentation? As I mentioned, we see the market fragmenting into a high credibility green hydrogen production, which looks at the impact on the grid, which looks at sustainability issues, and a low credibility market where those issues are being neglected. And I think we're actually seeing that the projects that are moving ahead the fastest are the low credibility projects. And that's a challenge in terms of the reputation of our industry globally. We see that leading green hydrogen producers, and we have a number of them on the call here today, they're committed to sustainability, but at the moment, that work isn't incentivized or recognized in global certification schemes. So we need to work together, producers, traders, investors, development partners, and customers, to push for higher standards, to make sure that that's reflected. And that's how we're using our green hydrogen standard. We're using it from an early stage to de-risk projects. So those projects that do have high credibility are recognized as such. So Nish, I'll leave it there. Thank you for giving me the floor to introduce today, and I'll hand over to you to sort of moderate our discussion.
Thanks very much, Sam. Maybe you can have that last slide on. It'll help us carry these discussions forward. And to everyone in the audience, soon after the panel discussion, we'll bring you in all for the questions. But I believe, the panel of experts we have here today might address some of those questions you might be having. So let me introduce our panel here. We have Mr. Samir Saxena, who is the Vice President of Engineering at Renew. Samir, thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Gaurav Agnihorty, who is the General Manager for Development at Hygenco. Hygenco has been doing a lot of good work in the space. Mr. Ashok Kumar Singh, who's the lead of the Energy Strategy Group within Adani Energy Solutions. And finally, we have Mr. Shankar Mohan, who's Business Development Head for South Asia at TUV India Private Limited. So if all our lead discussants are here and you have your cameras on, thank you very much for coming in. And before we start with a set of questions, I'd love for each of you all to come in, with your opening remarks, but also, if you could talk to some of the points that Sam had raised. And that will give us a lot of value before we begin our discussions. So maybe can we start with Ashok?
Yeah, sure, Nish. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me for this discussion. And it is very, encouraging to understand and to know that, people are acknowledging the differences in the standards that has been set by various organizations or various countries. Uh, for example, when we look at, Europe and the likes of US or the Japanese countries, they have set a very different carbon dioxide requirements per kg of hydrogen. But if we are focusing largely or wholly on production of hydrogen, we might be missing on the entire, picture of what it takes to produce hydrogen. When we think of producing hydrogen, it's not only that we need to have the electrolyzers, we need to have the uh, have the the RE in place. We have to couple them in an efficient manner, and therefore the requirement of bringing in the storage both for in terms of power as well as the the requirements of RE matching of the power from the various standards makes us to store the produced hydrogen. And on top of every layer we have to prove the origin of hydrogen. Yes, that there is a linkage between the hydrogen, between the electron, that the green electron we produced, and that has been used to manufacture the green molecule of hydrogen. So if we look at entirety in the universality of this entire thing, what we see is that it's not just hydrogen. It takes the lot of RE manufacturing, it takes a lot of storage battery manufacturing, it takes a lot of development, it takes a lot of land, it takes a lot of capital, it takes a lot of electrolyzer capacity and all. And therefore we at Adani are not only focusing on electrolyzer, we as a whole kind of focusing on the entire development of the entire ecosystem, and have to have a end-to-end control over the supply chain. And if we look at the key enablers that can kind of help us going forward, is something Jonas and the Sam already mentioned, is that the alignment with the international standards, to enhance the global trade. If we look at the global trade possibilities for the developing countries or the countries from where we come as a developer, is like kind of Europe or the Southeast Asian market or the Eastern market. And therefore we have to the linkage between the green electron we produce and at the same time the green molecule that we have generated out of that green electron. So therefore it becomes a very important aspect for us to technically match that linkage between the electron and the molecule. And further, as mentioned by other Sam and the Jonas, that the bilateral agreements have to have an alignment on the green attributes as stated in the Article 6.2 of UNFCCC, and therefore the quality of the Indian green attributes, which is acknowledged by the countries where we are targeting to export, becomes very important. That is why, because that is when we will be able to get the premium out of our product. Similarly, if we talk about the carbon accounting standards, most of the carbon accounting standards talks us, we kind of acknowledge the linkages of proton and the molecule and the electron. Therefore, it becomes important that uniform carbon accounting standards come into play. And what we also see is that it not only the capital that it matters. Most of the projects are kind of saying that there would be a post-production validation of the products that you are planning to sell, which kind of blocks your working capital requirements. And if what we believe is that if there could be some simple criteria based provisional certification methods, so that we can kind of manage our cash flow more efficiently, that would definitely be a key changing aspects for the entire value chain of hydrogen production. And production of green hydrogen is largely dependent on solar and wind. And therefore when we are designing the entire system of green hydrogen production integrated with the solar and wind, the predictability, the ability to produce your ability to project the power generation capacity going 10 days, 5 days in advance, or 3 months in advance becomes very critical. And therefore, our systems and the engineering should be integrated with those high digital technologies, so that you can able to project the power that you are going to produce through your RE, and therefore what you are going to produce as a green molecule of hydrogen and all. So that becomes very critical when we kind of design the system and the engineering of the overall system.
Thanks very much, Ashok. I think you've raised quite a lot of points there in your opening remarks. And it's, you raised the point about fragmentation of international standards. You also spoke about, how RE power and how do we account for RE power. That's what Sam, alluded to in the hourly matching and daily matching, something that, within the industry we call as temporal matching. But before we dive deeper, I want to bring in another developer that is looking at the export market, Mr. Samir Saxena. Mr. Samir, some opening remarks from you, but if you could also talk about how the fragmentation of international standards is affecting your project development and also your offtake agreements.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Nitesh. No, I would like to express my gratitude to GH2 team for inviting me for this panel discussion. A lot of good insight has been given by Jonas and Dr. Sam. And I think GH2 team has selected a very pertinent subject to talk about the standardization on the certification side. See, we as a developer, are facing several challenges, and one of the major challenges to get the offtake. Now, when you are developing a project to export for the export market, it's not just one particular continent, but you have, the entire globe open, to supply the product. Every region, every country has its own requirements, whereas European Union has come up with a, very clear guidelines, RED to RF and BO. There are many other countries like Japan, Korea, and other Southeast Asian countries. They are still in the process of firming up their requirements, and they vary a lot. And in such situation, as a developer, it becomes very, very challenging, to what kind of project they develop, so that they can meet the requirement of various regions, because your offtake could click any part of the globe. So it is not only just the offtake. The second most critical part is on the financing side. Securing funding is another very critical part of it, and your project has to be validated and should have been proven that you are producing a product and you are going to supply it on a sustainable basis with the commitment you have made for. So right at the beginning of the project, when it is at a concept stage, we at Renew are very, very careful and very conscious that, we take every element of the whole project in such a way that it meets the ultimate requirements of our customers. So like Sam mentioned about the pre-certification, it's the pre-certification or the validation becomes a very, very critical part of the whole value chain. When we talk about the green product, again, the question remains how green it is. And if you talk about a product which you say that, okay, it's blue, the question is how blue it is. So carbon intensity becomes a very, very critical part, wherein you are able to show to your off-taker or the customer that, yes, this is the whole value chain. And, you have this much of carbon intensity, and you have at least a certification, to prove that. Now, RED 2, which talks about, very clearly what is their expectation. There are IPHE from Japan. Similarly, the Korea has a different guideline available. So as a developer, we are, taking measures and very carefully looking into the market and trying to understand what different kind of requirements are coming up from the customers. Even there are certain places wherein the shipping and the combustion of the product is also accounted in the emission, right? And it makes really a very stringent conditions for project to develop. So just to, not taking too much of time, I would say that the certification is the need of the time for developer, and for us to, to be successful in the market, have to be very careful and timely do this certification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saxena. I think you've raised, some of the crucial pain points for developers. That is, if you're going to develop your project, which market are you focusing on, right? If you're going to build your project for Japan, and then, later on, you cannot have off-takers from Europe. So this does lead to a very, very pertinent predicament And of course, this issue, is something that as an industry, as governments, as communities, we need to address. This also brings me back to a quote that Sam said in one of his events, that these standards are not just for developers and governments. This is for people as well, because the carbon intensity of these projects have an effect on our very own lives. So thank you very much for your opening remarks. Next, I'd love to bring on Gaurav. Gaurav, I know Hyjunko has been doing some interesting projects in the space, a lot of captive projects. But with your opening remarks, if you could also add if you are looking at export markets, and if so, what are the markets you're looking at, and how are you, designing your projects for these markets?
Yeah, thanks, Nishant. I think it's a discussion that has to be taken up, and as very rightly put by Sam during his opening remarks, I think Europe has taken the next step. We can say that RFNBO is the most developed certification scheme at the moment, where we know what exactly the developers know which are the delegated acts, DA1, DA2, and what are the conditions to get pre-certified, because most of the projects currently are at a design stage. So I'll be very specific, Nishant. Yes, of course, we are looking at export markets. In fact, we have also signed a term sheet with one of the leading players in Europe. And for us, it's very important. We feel for any developer like us, it's important to get pre-certified and eventually get certified when it comes to the RFNBO compliance, because currently Europe is the market which has very clear directive. And again, as rightly put by Jonas, although there is no particular scheme that has been recognized by the European Union, we have different schemes like ISCC, Red Cert, your GH2 scheme. We have Certify. So the developers have different range, different options to get certified. But again, there are certain challenges which we all as a team have to find answers to. One of them is the issue of geographical correlation. So currently, there is a lot of question when it comes to whether is India a single grid, and there are certain uncertainties when it comes to answering this question. I think this is something which has to be tackled in the coming time. Also, when it comes to the Delegated Act 2 of Red 3 or Red 2, whatever we call it, currently it's Red 3 because the Red 3 is going to be the progression of Red 2. It clearly says that the GHG emission has to be from cradle to grave. So it also will account to the end use. So if someone is transporting ammonia and that has to be cracked to hydrogen, what are the cracking losses? How much time will it take to get the hydrogen cracked? So these questions have to be answered. And currently, if you look at Europe, there are no crackers. So we need a lot of answers together as a team if we want to get the pre-certification converted into certification at a later stage. So there are challenges, I feel, but we are we are taking the right steps. And Europe has taken that leadership role, guiding the world on how certification is supposed to be done, closely followed by Japan and South Korea. I think India also now should come up with its own certification scheme. And what we have worked, we as developers do reach out to MNRE, and what we have come to know is that there may be an Indian certification scheme very soon. So yes, this is very important for all the developers and for us as a community of green hydrogen.
Thank you very much, Gaurav. And our last lead discussant is Mr. Shankar Mohan from TUV India. And I think Shankar is one of the very few people in the country who's actually worked on a project accounting for its emissions and looking at the boundaries and everything else that comes with the certification mechanism. So, Mr. Shankar, if you could briefly introduce your work, but also one question I want you to address is, how does this certification for green hydrogen production differ from the usual certifications that you do, right? And is it really challenging? Can we adhere to all the strict norms that are being put out by these different governments across the world?
Yeah. So thank you, Nishant. I think most of the panel members already covered, right from Ashok, Gaurav, Jonas, as well Sam. and Samir also, of course, covered most of the content. Basically, I just wanted to indicate more about the standards and certification perspective, how we can look at. We are missing one opportunity of the domestic market. And if you look at NEP in India, they had come with jointly Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, MNRE, and IGEF, Indo-German Energy Forum. Jointly, they come out with about 6 pilot projects and about 143 projects throughout the country in South Asia market, especially in India. So we work with most of the projects, and our experience is the first question is what is the standard? And TÜV Nord, we used to follow the labeling requirements, which is in principle approved by EU. And we follow this labeling not now, it is being followed for last 1 decade when it comes to labeling requirements. And we also try to draw the attention from RED, RFNBO, and ISCC, ISCC Plus requirements. And collectively, we bring with our own research and come with the pre-evaluations. What is the project which is going to qualify towards green hydrogens? This 6 pilot project, which I referred in India, is basically a pilot project and which is at a design stage. During the detailed design stage, you're going to only assess on those requirements. Added to this, there is also an off-taker who comes with specific requirements. Off-taker could be from Germany and who also come with the requirement. We did a project about 6 months back, which is also an off-taker from Germany. And they wanted specific their requirements to be part of the assessment, so we could incorporate that. And there is an off-taker from Korea, off-taker from Japan. Then we also try to come with off-taker requirements. So how currently the market is revolving around is more of the European-based standards and the directives, plus off-taker, what they are asking as a commitment. And in addition to that, the domestic market is trying to aim towards these requirements. You know, the domestic market is one which we are always ignoring. But then I really find it it has much more potential opportunity for all of us to work, because NEP has a very big plan towards renewable energy in terms of capacity. Currently, CAGR is about close to 7 to 8%. As far as the national energy planning team is concerned, and they wanted to go for double this CAGR over a span of 5 years. So that's a plan they have. And most of this scheme also, they have identified who will be the stakeholder who will assess this. And mostly the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, BE, will take a major stake in India. And they will also come out jointly with the scheme for the assessment. And so I look at more of, a stake from domestic market will drive its own, path. And the overseas market, especially European market, we have a challenge is in terms of storage and transportation. So that's the biggest challenge. So MNRE is coming out with an option that if an organization is coming with innovation ideas and research project, they wanted to even fund for those projects. So they have started with about 6 projects now, wherein they are funding for those projects in terms of transportation, storage on technology side. So TÜV Nord, we have come out with our own labeling experience, and we have E-Engineers as a technology hub in Germany, eastern part of the north part of the Germany. And they also support us on technology side in terms of research and the development. So you also asked that how it is different from certification to, when it comes to this project assessment on green hydrogen. So if you see, we have E-Engineers, basically they are into technology side. And we exchange experience from our own counterpart from E-Engineers on technology side, and we also collaborate with them and do the pre-assessment for those projects. towards the eligibility criteria. So that's how we move forward with all the pilot projects in India. So that is in a way helping the organization who is looking for either domestic or even export market.
Wonderful, Mohan. Thank you very much. I think you've also, highlighted something crucial that the Indian government is doing in terms of policy actions. And it's, month by month, as we see, the Indian government has done very, very well executing on the National Green Hydrogen Mission. And, all of us in the industry, we cannot deny that. And compared to so many global peers, India is in the forefront. But you also raised some points on storage, right? Sam, if I can bring you in on energy storage, and if you can give some remarks from what you heard, but also address how different forms of energy storage will have an effect on these projects.
Yeah, thanks, Nish. And thanks everyone for the contributions. So, I wanted to come back on this storage thing because I think it's very important. And that's something that we're seeing with the project developers that we're working with. I want to come back to the sort of that hierarchy of projects I presented before. If you have a loose set of requirements for what projects are eligible for subsidies, then there's no need for energy storage in your project. You can just buy an annually matched PPA, and then you say, I'm buying renewable electricity. And then you plug your electrolyzer into the grid. If that's acceptable, then why would you go to the extra cost of putting a battery in your project? The reason you do that is because in some markets your green hydrogen won't be accepted as green. I come back to this tension between high credibility and low credibility. So we're seeing project developers, particularly those that are targeting the European market, they have their own dedicated renewables. They might have grid backup, but they're also looking at battery storage so that they can increase the utilization of their electrolyzers. So I want to come back to what are we doing in this pre-qualification work? What are the steps? And I'll just drop in the chat, a quick representation of that. Let's say we're working with a project developer. The first thing that we would do is try to drill down to these essential issues of how the project is being structured for delivery of a product into a particular market. If you are delivering green ammonia into Korea or Japan, then that's a very different project from delivering green ammonia into the European market. So the first thing that we would do when we're doing this pre-qualification work is to look at where is the project taking place? What do we expect? So let's take India as an example. What do we know that the definition of green hydrogen in India is 2 kilos. That's clear. But what we don't know is what are the detailed requirements in demonstrating when you're using renewable electricity or not. Will annually matched renewable electricity certification, will that be sufficient? Is it going to be quarterly? Is it going to be monthly? Is it going to be daily? Is it going to be hourly? We can then, in the second stage, and that's going to be one of the key issues, because it's going to drive the design of your project. It's going to drive what kinds of electrolyzers you purchase. So we start to work through those issues, and then we set them out. We can say, here are a couple of different scenarios for the development of the project. Here's what we expect the emissions to be under these different conditions. Then you've got something you can take to a customer, something you can take to a bank. You can say, look, we're not just talking about this in the abstract. We've had this validated by an external party. Storage is one of the key issues that we look at. Another one is transportation. And Jonas mentioned this right at the outset, and it's really, really important. Most standards around the world are it's a terrible term, they call it well to gate. And they use that terminology because it comes from the oil and gas industry. But it's up, you can just think of it at the point of production. So the US standard, the Australian standard, the Canadian standard, and most likely the Indian standard as well, is at the point of production. But the European standard is full life cycle. So one of the other things that we do is, okay, let's say again, it's green ammonia. What are the different routes for getting that product from India to Rotterdam? How many kilometers? What kind of ship? What kind of emissions? So in most scenarios, if you're using renewable electricity, at the point of production, you're going to have very, very low emissions. If you're using renewable electricity that counts as zero emissions, then at the point of production, you have green hydrogen. But then you've got to ship it. And it all depends on how you're going to ship it. You need to model those emissions for different routes, different shipping options. And of course, in the longer run, we hope that ships will be running on green methanol and green ammonia, but we're not there yet. And I guess that this is the last point I'd make, and several people have touched on this. There is uncertainty. Some of these things will be resolved in the next 6 months or the next 12 months, but we're building projects that are going to be producing for 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. So we're also having to take decisions. Where do we think standards are going to be in 10 years? Where do we think standards are going to be in 20 years? That's a much harder question to answer. So we've got some work that we can do in the next 6 months in Australia, in India, to sort of clarify what these requirements are. That will give us more certainty. But the reality is we're making investments for the long run. And so there are risks that 10 years from now, and that's why if I was investing in green hydrogen projects today, I'd be looking at the highest credibility options. Because even if issues like water are not part of the agenda today, I can almost guarantee that they will be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. The standards are only going to get tougher. They're not going to get easier, because we have to get by 2050 to net zero. So that's why we use this simple framework, this pre-qualification work, which can be done in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We sign a non-disclosure agreement, we set up a data room, and we start to stress test these projects against these key issues. So that's how it would be great if we had a whole set of electrolyzers up and running and we're ready to certify the product. We're not there yet. We're at an early stage, but we can do this quite strategic work at an early stage to identify the best projects, independently validate that information, and get it in front of investors and get it in front of customers so that they have the confidence to sign offtake agreements. Because if you don't have an offtake agreement, you'll never get a project to FID. You need some kind of external validation to help get the confidence to get those signed offtake agreements. Thanks, Nish.
Thanks, Sam. I think this is a question for all the 3 developers we have here. This is, what are the signs that off-takers are looking for within your project? And how has that been influencing your project development? If I can start with Samir.
Sure, Nish. Yeah. So as I mentioned at the beginning, right, that the companies we are engaging with for the offtake in different regions, they have different requirements. But the fact remains that when you talk about a green project which is completely catered by renewable energy, your emission level are extremely low. But I agree with the Sam that maybe gate to from up to the gate, probably your emissions are so low that it doesn't pose any challenge. But the moment you get into the shipping and maybe in some case of hydrogen derivatives, if you use for the combustion, probably the emissions in shipping and the combustion will exceed the the target which has been specified by the off-taker, right? So it's, I would say it's a continuous process. Although you are having a green project, we are having a green project which we are developing, but all the time we have to keep a check in our mind that where product can go, what could be the requirement, what kind of changes you might have to do when you are developing the concept, because once you move forward towards the engineering or the field, right, it is very difficult to get back to the original, right? And it will be very time consuming and money consuming. So our approach has been that, right from the beginning, we start looking into the concept which fulfills the most of the requirement or the most stringent requirement, which is spelled out today, and then keep evaluating different off-takers.
Samir, on that note, what kind of sustainability criteria, that is not fully established? Sam raised issues around water, and we know that almost 70 to 80% of Indian green hydrogen projects are in water stressed areas, especially, right? And what have you done, internally to evaluate the sustainability criteria, and have you identified any real risks, and how have you addressed them if you did?
No, I think when you talk about conceiving a project, the key requirement which you have to look into is the supply of utilities, right? At the time when you are scouting for land, right, there are certain criterias which you have to keep in your mind before you zero down the region where you are buying the land or the location. So, for example, somebody is looking for land, scouting for the land. They have to look for the port, how near it is. You have to look for the water source. You have to look for the electricity supply from where it is coming. So beginning of the project itself, you have to have that vision based on which you can develop a project which is fully sustainable. I would say that you rightly said that the water supply could be a big threat and challenge for such projects where you are putting electrolyzer of massive capacity. They are water guzzler. So you have to find out if you have a land available somewhere closer to the ocean, you can put a desal plant, manage it on permanent basis. If it is coming from river or canal, you have to ensure that they have a round the clock supply and yearly, if there is any interruption in supply, they should have adequate, the storage facilities available. So these are the very conceptual thing which one have to have in their mind when they are conceiving the project. And fortunately, we have been very thoughtful in that respect, and so far we see that the kind of concept we have developed, it will be a pretty good success to us.
Well, Samir, that you sounded very confident there, so I'm assuming you've done quite a lot of homework in getting this. But before, let me move to Gaurav. Gaurav, on the last two questions I asked Samir, if you would like to come in on that and give me Hygenco's perspective.
I think pre-certification is very important. Most of the off-takers whom we are talking to have, especially in Europe, have this question. They ask if it is RFNBO compliant. So to answer your question, everyone is asking about it. And we as developers are taking the right steps. We are ensuring that we comply to these delegated acts, DA1 and DA2. And as Mr. Samir said, we are ensuring, similar to what they are doing, that we have the best technologies like desalination, which adhere to the principles of sustainability. So yes, even we are looking at these technologies in Africa.
Ashok, if you'd like to come in on, on the Adani perspective, I know Kavda is it's in a very, very unique, place, right? You're really not affecting communities there, but water is an issue. But how are you addressing all of these?
Yeah, before Nisha, I know, as you mentioned, that water and the land and everything is not much of an issue for Adani, and we kind of have secured land for almost development of 50 gigawatts of RE and development of the associated utilities. What we when we speak to the off takers and all, and even to the financiers, what we see is that they kind of look for people, some people kind of matchmakers who can act as a matchmaker for them and kind of give them a trust factor to them, so that when they are going to finance or when they are going to get do an offtake agreement, that credibility of the matchmaker, and that is, we feel, I know, and the organizations like Green Hydrogen Organization can make more credible inputs and make those initiations of the project. Those matchmaking activities of the bilateral matchmaking activities makes an important role, and specifically the financiers, what they look at is how do you are going to control the cost of your product. Suppose tomorrow your cost of electricity goes up, or your cost of electrolyzer goes up, or it's not up to the expected downtime trend. So therefore, then that integrated development concept, which the Adani is kind of building up, right from manufacturing the polysilicon to modules, and then manufacturing batteries to electrolyzers, and then developing the transmission corridors and doing that desalination and everything, and leveraging its ecosystem to partly do the captive demand captive demand consumption, and then partly export it to the potential sectors. So that integrated development is what gives the comfort, and at the same time the financiers and the developers and the off-takers look for. The cost stability is what they look for, and obviously the trust factor is in terms of what you are saying is actually going to happen, is actually going to be assured while you develop the project. Yeah. I think you are on mute, Nish.
Thanks, Ashok. Sorry, I was just saying the last point you raised is very, very crucial, because you've not done your project, so they have to, rely on trusting you. I see we have only 17 minutes left, but before we open to all the questions on the floor, I want to bring Shankar Mohan in again. We all say that green hydrogen has zero emissions, right? Of course, the electrolyzer is giving zero emissions, but where do you think a major chunk of the emissions are coming from? And also, if you could speak to, from your experience, what's the quantum of emissions coming from shipping, right? If you are going to ship from India to EU, what numbers have you seen? If you're okay to share with the group here.
Yeah, maybe on addressing your first queries, we constantly work on with our research team who supports us on legal framework. When you address about water belt, and where the project is located in the context of South Asia market, and we try to address it through the legal requirements first. And we also take into account of the off-taker, what they have their own requirements, because off-taker also, if you're openly addressing these concerns, and many occasions I come across, though the project owner is willing in India, but the off-taker wanted to probably follow all the local protocols. So we try to take a balanced approach, and legal parties one we always consider. When it comes to transportation, of course, we try to take into account of our own labeling criteria. I referred you, there is a E Engineers, which is our own firm, which is based in Essen, Germany. And they come out with the requirements for storage and transportation requirements as a set of criteria. We developed our own criteria, and we are also in the process of getting, approval from European Union. So, which is in a way helping us to take us in the right path for those companies who is really aspiring towards implementing, the rules and regulations towards the green hydrogen production and transportation storage. We are able to address the requirements.
Thanks very much, Mohan. And I see a lot of questions coming from the audience. So, all of y'all on the panel, you're welcome to, step in and answer. And Sam, you too. I think the first question we had was on India's grid. It came from Sanjeev Kumar. Mentioned about the challenge with regards to the bidding zone and treating India as a single unified grid. How is the pre-certification? How does the pre-certification provide comfort to the suppliers and developers for acceptance by the EU?
Yeah. Now, this case, it is in India, we have taken a single grid approach. And we also, in principle, follow the same approach, and which we also taken it up with our European counterpart. And so right now, we are treating India as a single grid approach.
Sam, if you want to come in on this, I know there's been a lot of debate at the early stages how EU will look at India's grid.
Yeah, the short answer is that this is, when we do pre-qualification work in India, this comes up as one of the first 2 or 3 issues that we focus on. The short answer is that the the European Commission have made it clear that they're not going to change any aspects of the Delegated Act. They've now put this interpretation question, on the voluntary schemes. And as Jonas mentioned at the outset, as of today, there are 0 voluntary schemes. So there's no one that can actually give a definitive answer to that. But what they have done is they have published a Q&A document where they've provided a little bit more detail about how this is determined within the European market. And there's a set of tests that are applied. I'll just paste, I won't go, it's a very technical topic. I'll paste the link to the Q&A document in the chat. If anyone would like to set up a call to go through this in more detail, I'd be happy to do that. But the delegated acts do refer to whole countries being considered a bidding zone, but they mean that in a European context, because obviously we have some very small countries in Europe. I think that this is a risk factor for projects in India. I understand that the Indian government's position is clear, but there is a question about whether this will be accepted. And there is a risk that if you go to 3 different voluntary schemes, that you get 3 different answers. So this is something that does need to be clarified, and everyone will be waiting to see, who gets designated as a voluntary scheme and how those rules are being interpreted. So unfortunately, it's very difficult to give a definitive answer today because all of the building blocks are not in place.
Thanks, Sam. To the other developers here on the panel, what are your perspectives on this? And are you putting your bets on India, on India's grid being recognized as one grid? Or are you preparing for, challenges that may come?
Nishant, we feel that India is one grid. And I think as per the Q&A document that has been released by the European Commission, I think it indicates India to be a single grid, a single bidding zone. So, yeah. So for the moment, we are considering that.
There's no debate on that, right? Well, Samir, if you want to...
No, I think it's very clear. Means we cannot, consider it differently. Yes, it is a single grid. That is what has been considered. So until things become more clear from other side, I think our assumption is going to remain the same.
I also have, when this comes up, the other question that comes up related to the delegated acts is, with regards to state aid, right? How is the EU going to look at, state aid from, the federal level and the state level? And do you think this has an effect on your project?
Nish, so we didn't script this, but this is a great question. Because people often talk about the 3 pillars. They talk about time matching, market matching, and additionality. But there's another pillar, and that's state aid. And there's quite strict restrictions in Europe on the eligibility of renewable electricity, which has received state aid in the past. And that applies to imports as well. So the concept of state aid is very well understood in a European context. It's not well understood outside of Europe. So, for example, if the Indian government provides some concessionary terms, for example, of wheeling charges on the grid, is that considered a form of state aid? So, again, this is something that we have delved into in significant detail on a couple of projects. And it is slightly inefficient. We've actually made this point to the Commission. It makes no sense for 20 individual projects to all ask this one question and then get different answers from different voluntary schemes. One option is for the Indian government to make a representation in Brussels and say, here are some issues that apply to all of the projects in our country, and we need a clarification on this point. So that's something, we've heard that from several developers. When we have an opportunity to raise these issues with the European Commission, we've done so. And it's not just in India where this is a challenge. We're seeing the same questions come up in Morocco, in Egypt. People want clarity on these issues around state aid and around geographical correlation.
So Nishant, if I may add to this, we raised the same query to MNRE a couple of, I think, 3 weeks back in Delhi. And we came to know that there was a meeting planned between MNRE and the European Union where this question was to be discussed. I think the meeting was supposed to take place on 25th of June. I hope it has taken place. And yeah, we need clarity on this.
Wonderful. Thanks, Gaurav. Let's go on to the next question here in the Q&A. One is, what are the risk factors in having fragmented system of standards? How will it impact the projects that have projected a commercial stage around 27 to 30? Do you foresee any delays? Well, I see Jonas has already answered the question here. The inevitable risk is surely that rules and standards will evolve. It is for this reason the green hydrogen standard has been designed to be flexible to changing rules and standards. I think, Sam, if you want to highlight what Jonas is saying here with regards to how we've designed, our pre-qualification, the entire standard piece. And after that, if Ashok and Samir and Gaurav want to come in on this.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of aspects of our standard where we say, that we refer to that the project developer needs to demonstrate a credible approach. So we don't set a very specific test. We just look at whether the project developer has a credible approach to handling these issues in the circumstances. So, an individual developer can't, well, let me take the example of Egypt, for example. If you've got a project in Egypt and you're connected to the grid, an individual developer can't develop a renewable electricity certification system by themselves. They have to manage with what mechanisms are available. So that's why we make reference to project developers demonstrating they have a credible approach. Just to come back to the question, I would also that where there is uncertainty, that introduces risk. And where you have risk, then that has an impact on the cost of capital and getting these projects through. So it is a challenge. And as I wrote on one of the other questions, but we also see customers, they want to secure supply. So we're also seeing some customers that are willing to take some regulatory risk because they want to get into the market. So, it's not just all of the risk is being carried by project developers. We're actually seeing that some offtake partners are saying, you know what, we're willing to accept that we are operating in a fast-moving industry. We want to support these early stage projects, and we're willing to take some of this risk in order to get into the market. And that's very important as well. And it's not a focus of our discussion today, but at GH2, we do a lot of work on trying to bring together to make that connection between the producers and the consumers to make sure that we are sort of catalyzing activity. Otherwise, we'll all be sitting here in 5 years having the same discussion. So yes, there's risk. Yes, that's increasing costs, but there are also customers that are willing to take some of that risk, and that's important.
No, yeah, I agree with
Yes, Samir.
I agree with Sam what he said. Like, it's a evolving industry and things are changing very fast. And surely there are rationale why those things are changing. So yes, you have to stick to a basis and move ahead. And as the situation calls for, you take corrective action to the minimal impact on the whole project.
Thanks very much, Samir. That's good to hear. You're also looking at it in this perspective. We have another question from Rahul Sharma. Are pumped hydro projects qualified as RFNBO compliant RE source? Maybe Shankar Mohan, if you can come in, sir.
Yeah, I mean, basically we did follow the requirements, what is given in the delegated acts, as well as RED and ISCC plus, and including machinery requirements and the local legal requirements which are applicable. And about 6 projects we already did it at a pilot stage in South Asia market. And all these projects are basically meeting the requirements of the current Delegate Act, and it's a kind of an you take them towards the right path because as such we do not have at the domestic level any set of schemes, one single scheme which is being accepted. So naturally, everyone wanted to set some kind of a, the basic requirements for these projects. And while doing the investment, and the off-taker who is coming to India also do have their own set of requirements. So they wanted to see how is the compliances with those requirements. And in fact, I think Jonas was mentioning in Japan, they have to, METI is working on CFD scheme. So the Japanese CFD scheme is going to be released in mid of summer this year, and we are also eagerly looking for the such requirements. So wherein we can try to add anything additional requirements for the project which is targeting for Japanese-based off-taker. So that way we try to see the balanced approach of take into account of off-taker, and as well what is being prevailing practice in the global market. Not only we refer all the time to Europe, but we also refer to the other continental requirements.
Thanks, Mohan. Sam, if you want to quickly answer that question as well, how is pumped hydro storage looked at?
There's again a long answer and a short answer. The short answer is it's not eligible. And I think there are some particular issues around that in Europe. There's reasons why it wasn't included, and it's a bit of a blind spot. These rules were developed for Europe, and kind of almost like as an afterthought, they apply to imports. So it's not an issue within the European market, but it is a big issue outside Europe. And this is exactly why the Green Hydrogen Organization exists. So that we can actually bring some of these perspectives from outside Europe to the attention of European policymakers. So we've been following up with the International Hydropower Association, and we've put this issue on the agenda for the Commission. It's not an issue in Europe, but it's an issue outside Europe, and we need to resolve it. Because if you use renewable electricity to pump water uphill, you should be able to call the pump storage renewable when you use it. At the moment, you can't, and that's a problem.
Thanks very much, Sam. We've come to the end of this and end of the time we have allocated, but we do have a few more questions. But if I can, quickly answer about, several standards coexisting, I think that is something we've all come to accept. There will be several standards that are being built by governments based on their own national interests. And there will be voluntary schemes like ours. And we began this almost 2 years ago before any of the governments had established these standards. And we come from the perspective that, this industry has to be developed sustainably, and we should not repeat the mistakes we've made, in the extractive industries. But I think, this is something the developers are getting used to, and, governments are getting used to, and it will come down to, good negotiation skills between diplomats and a lot more, participation from communities and people like yourselves. So let's draw this to a close. If any of the lead discussants have any closing remarks, but before that, I'd love to have all of you all back, 1 year from now to see how this has all evolved, because we were left with so much uncertainty, a lot of questions where, we couldn't give straight answers, and we know it's not clearly defined, but let's see how we progress in 12 months. But let's start with Ashok. Ashok, any closing remarks from you, please?
I think we have almost covered the entire aspect of developing that green hydrogen. But yes, going forward, that grid aspect, that working capital management, and that reducing cost of electrolyzer will certainly matter, and doing that entire control of the value chain will be key to have the successful project development. Is what I would say.
Thanks, Ashok. Mr. Samir Saxena?
No, I would say that, it's a giant wheel. We all are trying to push and roll it, together. And I'm sure the time comes and it will have the momentum and things will move much smoothly. On the regulatory front and on the developer side, things will get mature with time. And I'm very positive of it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Gaurav?
I'm very confident that from pre-certification, probably next year, we will be talking about certification of some of the projects. So I feel we have taken the right step at the right time. Things are moving in the right pace with developers and off-takers signing term sheets, MOUs. I think it's an exciting time that we are in.
Shankar Mohan, any closing remarks from you, sir?
Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, I would also share eventually the views of others, and we would have a set of standards defined maybe in India context.
Well, looks like we lost Shankar Mohan there, but overall, all the lead discussants are positive about us moving, forward in this industry. And of course, it is a very, very important industry, in the larger picture of climate change. And before I bring in Sam for his closing remarks, I want to thank our members, and two of our members are here, Adani and Renew. And it's due to companies like this that, make all of this possible. So thank you very much for your support. And Sam, if you could come in with some closing remarks, please.
Yeah, thanks, Nish, and thank you to all the panelists and everyone that joined today. Just two things from me. Let's keep working together. Let's keep working together on two things. One, policy. There's some really important decisions to be taken in the next couple of months about what these certification systems are going to look like in India and how they interact with other markets like Korea, like Japan, like Europe. And we can definitely reconvene a group like this and make sure that we're bringing our expertise to bear. In the meantime, the second thread is let's keep working together on making sure that we have more high credibility projects that are moving ahead. So we need the policy and we need the practice. And we are ready to support you in that work. We have experience from over a dozen projects around the world. We can help you unpick some of these questions around bidding zones, around state aid, around different options for around 3 pillars requirements. So please feel free to get in touch. And we look forward to the next session, Nish. Thank you for convening the call today and look forward to the next one.
Thanks very much, Sam. Thanks everyone who joined in. And once again, our lead discussants, thank you very much. It was lovely having you all here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
Thank
pleasure
you.
being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.